From the far north of Britain, a border several thousand kilometers long used to run right across Europe, the Limes, a kind of iron curtain of the Roman Empire. Rivers, palisades, and walls formed Rome's bulwark against the barbarians. Along the Limes, military camps evolved into flourishing villages, protected by gigantic border installations and Rome's legions. But how threatened were the cities? What happened when the superpower showed signs of weakness? How did it counter the danger along the Limes? The Limes ran down there, separating the Roman Empire from the barbarians, the free Germanic peoples. Yet the largest structure ever built in Europe is invisible in many places, destroyed by intensive agriculture. How are scientists supposed to solve the mysteries of the Limes after almost 2,000 years when it doesn't exist anymore? An experiment is intended to provide intriguing perspective and insight. Where old field maps list towers, where elevations of the ground imply foundations, bales of straw are being piled up, imaginary watchtowers on the Limes. The result proves there was a direct line of sight between all the towers. That way, signals could be relayed at lightning speed. The borders of the Roman Empire cut Europe in two. Around the time of Christ's birth, the Rhine and Danube protected Rome's territories north of the Alps. But these natural borders were long. To get a shorter connection, the Romans advanced further into the Barbaricum in the second part of the 1st century AD. What was the Limes' exact course? Christoph Schäfer of the University of Trier studies the fortification's military nature. Was it really an insurmountable bulwark?
The borders were defended, yes, but we must not imagine them as fixed front lines like in World War I or World War II. This was no Atlantic wall.
So what was the Limes? The scientists don't see anything but countryside. An infrared laser scanner underneath the helicopter scans the soil profile inch by inch. The scanner looks across fields and forests. The scientists hope the device will discover the invisible Limes even deep in the woods. Martin Scheich, an expert on 3D measurement, has specialized in this new technology. The plan seems to work. A straight line is visible in the middle of the scanned strip. The border of the Roman Empire, right through the middle of Germany. Evaluation in the hangar. Schäfer is intrigued. The forest has simply been subtracted. Rampart and ditch are clearly recognizable and calibrated to an inch. A square structure captures the historian's attention. A watchtower, probably from the first expansion phase of the Limes, limites in plural, meaning swaths. Patrolled pathways stood at the beginning of the control zone that features a mysterious peculiarity in Baden-Württemberg. Here, the barrier runs in a completely straight line for many kilometers, over hills and dales, as if it had been drawn with a ruler. "8 in the morning, 3 degrees Fahrenheit, the start of work for prospective land surveyors from the Stuttgart Technology University for Applied Sciences."
Machst du den Reflektorstab dann noch ein bisschen höher?
Project supervisor Siegfried Schenk explains the reason behind this effort.
The Romans drew the limes straight as an arrow across the landscape. As geodesists, we are of course interested in establishing how straight it actually is.
A difficult task for the students because the ancient fortification's point of reference is unclear. Is it the middle of the ditch? Is it the original foundations of the towers? Or the remains of the original rampart? The thousands of readings yield an incredible result. Over a distance of 50 kilometers, the limes deviates only 90 centimeters from the ideal line, based on the middle of the ditch.
To mark out a line of 50 kilometers in length with a precision like this is an enormous feat. We really haven't the faintest idea yet how the Roman surveyors and builders managed this.
Geometer oder Baumeister so etwas hinbekommen haben.
Nor do we know why they even did it. Was it to impress the barbarians beyond the palisade with their art of engineering? Strategically, this masterpiece is senseless as it made no use of topography. The straight line must have been a demonstration of knowledge and thereby power. But who knows whether the Germanic tribes were actually intimidated by it? Altogether, there were 7,000 kilometers of frontier to protect, and everywhere the same regulations were in place. In Germania, even the food was standardized. The meals were delivered pre-sliced and portioned to the 900 watchtowers, meals on wheels, so to speak. Out there was the cold, harsh land Roman authors gave account of with a shudder, populated by wild animals and uncivilized barbarians. Out there the enemy lurked, who had thoroughly defeated Roman governor Varus and his 3 legions in the year 9 AD. Germania Magna, an unpredictable neighbor. Roman troops were deployed in the area behind the boundary wall. Why not directly at the limes?
The main military function of a limes is to enable you to monitor and to repel any intrusions by sending signals to rearward camps and their troops, who would then be sent forward in a pincer movement to converge upon the enemy and destroy them in the field.
The emperor's cavalry, a rapid reaction force. The soldiers' iron masks reveal no emotions, show no fear. The elaborate alarm system at the limes activated one of the most perfect military machines in world history. In a flash, the troops already cornered approaching enemies at the forefront of the limes. Provided that there were enough soldiers deployed in the area. After all, the upper Germanic Rhaetian limes was 559 kilometers long, and groups of Germanic warriors could show up anywhere. The Romans built 60 forts along the border. One particularly impressive fort was located at today's Aalen, the greatest cavalry fort north of the Alps. It housed 1,000 horsemen, at least on paper. The authorized strength of a garrison was rarely achieved since the troops were quickly reassigned wherever the empire was facing the biggest threat at that moment, from Britannia to Africa. The budgetary situation was important as well. How much border protection was the emperor able to afford? How dangerous the Germanic tribes really were can be illustrated by examining the statues of the emperor. Every fort held one of these statues, but none of them were preserved. The invading tribes smashed everything to pieces when the Limes fell. Are these tiny pieces a symbol of the infamous furor Teutonicus, the dreaded ferocity of the Germanic tribes? A toe, part of the corslet, the general's baton, a nose, but not a complete face of a Roman emperor. How well did the Limes protect the province of Raetia, the fertile floodplain of the Danube? To scientists, one place is especially interesting: Ruffenhofen in Franconia. Long before sunrise, Joachim Vogt's team gets ready. Early mornings provide the best conditions for a ride in the airship. Inflating the airship and checking its envelope. Unlike a Zeppelin, a non-rigid airship, or blimp, doesn't have a rigid truss. Takeoff. The inflatable airship is flying along the Limes slowly and at low altitude. A dead straight hedge where the Devil's Wall used to be, white and red and 4 meters high, a part of the Limes that was built in stone. From the air, it is obvious where the course of the border deviated. What is not visible from above, however, is that there was a veritable Roman fort at this spot. Centuries of soil cultivation have caused it to disappear, at least above ground. Yet underground, messages from the fort have been preserved. Geophysics renders the complex visible again. The area has never been built over, a lucky stroke in densely populated Germany. The radar waves, electric currents, and the terrestrial magnetic field are disrupted only by the Roman interference. Based on this data, Jörg Fassbinder's team of geophysicists calculates the layout of the military camp at Ruffenhofen. 4 defense trenches surrounded the complex from the 2nd century. A fort for 500 troops who regularly patrolled the Limes or were alerted for fast deployment on horseback. Horse dung is worth its weight in gold for the scientists. In it, wonderfully noticeable magnetic bacteria grow, even underground. They are indicators of the Roman cavalry's stables. A blimp can come down to an altitude of merely 5 meters above the ground or stand completely still. And with no rotor blade, the airship doesn't raise any dust like a helicopter, which wouldn't be permitted at an excavation anyway. It is easy to recognize that the church has been built in the middle of a Roman fortlet. Discoveries without a spade. But even the aerial images can't reveal why Rome's borders came under threat. The real function of the Limes is hotly disputed among scholars. And there are still excavations being conducted, sometimes even in deep mud. A drained pond that was used to breed carp offers the archaeologists a unique opportunity. Moisture preserves organic matter. Layer by layer down into history, a furnace that stood in the vicus, the civilian settlement outside the gates to the fort. Shards of glass. So luxury reached Dambach at the foot of the Hesselberg mountain in Middle Franconia as well. At first designed as a small, numerous fort, it was later expanded into a cohort fort. Was the threat at the Limes growing? The timbers in the mud are supposed to help answer these questions. Timber poles were rammed into the earth that was already swampy back then to serve as a foundation for the fortifications. In a joint effort, the excavators wrench a piece of evidence from the earth. The sharpened pole is preserved perfectly and thick enough for dendrochronologists, tree ring scientists, to determine the date of its felling from the pattern of the age rings. Carefully cleaned and cut into slices, the surface of the biological calendar is evenly dissected with a razor. Chalk, a secret recipe. It makes the age rings of the tree slice seem more three-dimensional. Under the microscope, the distance between the individual age rings is measured to 1/100th of a centimeter, and the tree species is identified. The different distances result in a pattern that is compared to a tree ring calendar going back 12,000 years. If the patterns coincide, the scientists know exactly, to the year, when the tree was felled. In 182 AD, the oak tree was felled and presumably rammed into the swamp of Dambach soon after. The fort at the Limes was most likely reinforced at that time. It would fit, as Emperor Commodus had the border installations expanded at the end of the 2nd century, just like he did with the fort at Holzhausen in Taunus. The threat was growing. After decades of relative quiet, the Limes increasingly comes under pressure at the turn of the 3rd century. In Weissenburg in Middle Franconia, archaeologists have found signs for the Romans' growing uncertainty as well. Schaefer is discussing the virtual reconstruction of the fort with Sebastian Sommer, head of the Bavarian Office for Archaeological Monument Conservation, and his staff member, Robert Frank. The height of the buildings is unusual, room for stockpiling. Well-stocked granaries were crucial to a successful campaign and during a siege by Germanic tribes. The tribes were increasingly becoming bolder. More and more often, groups would cross the border. Ever-growing waves of invaders were surging against the Limes. The temple servants in Weissenburg panicked too. In 1979, an accidental find provided evidence of the fear of advancing barbarians. Only 70 meters from the Thermae, a man wants to dig an asparagus bed and strikes metal while pronging. At the time, he has no idea he will become a millionaire thanks to the finder's fee. A temple treasure, presumably buried by the Romans in connection with the invasions of the Alemanni, Elbe Germanic people, around 233 AD, in the vain hope of being able to recover it later. Precious figurines, Mercury, messenger of the gods. Juno, and Jupiter, the major gods. Mars, the god of war, a Mercury with a Celtic neck ring, and another one with a caduceus, Apollo with a lyre. None of them could protect the Limes, not even Venus and Victoria. How could they bury their goddess of victory? In the Barbaricum, in the land of bears and wolves, in the misty jungles of Germania, something was brewing at the end of the 2nd century. The peaceful neighborliness with friendly clans with whom the Romans did business across the border was disturbed. The climate was changing. It became noticeably colder and drier. Crop yields were on the decline, trees grew back slower, and resources became increasingly scarcer. Every severe winter intensified the hardship in the thatched huts. The old order seemed to dissolve. From the depths of the Barbaricum, new tribes were pushing southwards. Occasional forays turned into the beginning of the migration period. More and more people set forth. The rich empire was alluring. Each bad harvest increased the pressure on the border. Now the rear troops were called upon, as well as the warships of the inland fleet. The boats operated like small mobile forts, so-called burgi. From the water they controlled the whole border zone, inside and out. The strength of these floating weapon systems, they were rowed by soldiers. At hotspots, they could debark immediately and capture invading Germanic tribes. Military expert Christoph Schäfer is convinced of their strike capability. He recreated and tested one of these ships.
These vessels were more than small burgi. They were highly efficient and agile. Apart from using them to patrol and monitor the border, you could employ them in landings and offensive operations to attack the enemy from the rear.
The Danube near Stepperg, strategically an extremely important place for the Romans. They are said to have built a bridge with 20 piers and a total length of more than 500 meters. Underwater archaeologists are trying to find evidence of it. Buoys mark the positions of foundations of piers already identified. The Danube is rising, the current is quick and dangerous. Nevertheless, Marcus Prell and his team of divers are getting ready. They want to search for more piers in the Oxbow Lake because the river used to have a different, untamed course. Historian Schäfer is anxious to see whether they can locate more remains. There is no precise description of this engineering feat in Roman literature. The water of the blue Danube is not exactly clear. Still, the divers do find strong timber piles. Are these the foundation piles of the main bridge? But why are there no stones? Until now, historians have assumed that there were stone foundations. Underwater, they take samples of the wood. In the dendrochronological lab, they reveal when the enormous bridging took place, in the middle of the 2nd century. at the exact same time when the provinces along the Danube were expanded.
Bridges have always been of utmost strategic importance. Back then there were fewer than today, but they were parts of the trade infrastructure. And in an emergency, you could redeploy whole armies across big streams.
The border with Germania Magna, the land the Romans never conquered, remained an unstable border. The terminus of the land Limes was heavily fortified. Here, the artificial barrier meets another river, at Eining on the Danube. The river forms the so-called wet Limes from here on to the Black Sea. In antiquity, the fort at Eining was located right next to the riverbank, but the course of the river has shifted over the centuries. The foundations of walls, barracks, headquarters, and the Thermae are clearly visible. But the archaeologists learn even more. In the Marcomannic Wars around 170 AD, the fort was destroyed, the wet border overrun. The entire province of Raetia slipped from Roman control for a while. Protection of the cargo vessels took top priority now. The Danube was the main artery of traffic. Supplies for the army were decisive. Nature, wild and unruly, posed a threat on the empire's outer edges as well. The Danube Gorge at Weltenburg, a spectacular primal landscape. The riverbed has dug deep into the bedrock. The rapids and shallows of the narrow passage are visible to the naked eye. Deadly obstacles, but the danger to crews was an accepted risk, since the transfer of goods was more important.
Of course, rivers were lanes of transport for precious commodities. Since they often also constituted borders, any troops which operated in enemy country could be supplied via the waterways. This necessitated escorts for the convoys, and this is where the specially constructed riverboats of antiquity proved their worth time and again.
Escorts for convoys on the most important route for trade and traffic from Central to Eastern Europe and on to the Black Sea. Along the way, the Imperial Navy did not only have to brave treacherous currents and pass steep cliffs. No one knows how many ships were shattered to pieces on this rock. There were tempting destinations as well. The luxurious city of Carnuntum on the high banks of the Danube in today's Lower Austria promised southern Dolce Vita. Carnuntum is one of the best researched Roman cities at the Limes. Archaeologists encounter traces from 5 centuries. In its heyday, the city had a population of 50,000. So there is a lot to sweep. Around 6 AD, the future emperor Tiberius set up winter camp in Carnuntum and went to war with the Marcomanni under King Maroboduus. 3 years later, Maroboduus passed Varus's head on to Rome. It had been sent to him by Arminius as a sign of his victory. It was proof of his loyalty to the alliance. Yet, the Marcomanni still remained a constant threat. The legionnaire fortress at Carnuntum became a base for campaigns into the Barbaricum. Merchants followed the army. They made the city rich, which generated greed. In 171 AD, the Marcomanni and Quadi sacrificed Roman weapons to their gods. Their army had broken through the Limes and looted cities in northern Italy. The border was no insurmountable defensive line after all. Emperor Marcus Aurelius had to act. He too set up winter camp in Carnuntum to lead his legions against the Germanic enemy in the spring. Roman interests always extended beyond the Limes. Warmed by the floor heating system in his luxurious villa, Marcus Aurelius must have planned his campaign meticulously on those winter nights. Maybe he anticipated the danger and knew about the size of the enemy army when he asked the gods for guidance. After the thaw, the empire struck back. The Roman army rode north on the Morava River, which joins the Danube opposite Carnuntum, deep into the heartland of the Marcomanni, today's Moravia. According to history, the gods intervened only in the most urgent emergencies. A heavy thunderstorm rescued the men who had been surrounded for days and were close to dying of thirst. At last they could successfully return to Carnuntum. Every soldier thanked his gods. The Christians thanked theirs. The victory was celebrated extensively in the amphitheater with bloody games. They required an impressive number of prisoners and wild animals. The legionnaires especially liked the gladiator fights, where defeated Germanic warriors had to slaughter each other. The emperor had his own box, which indicates how important this border city was. Flexible awnings were available to shade the celebrating crowd at any time of day. The Roman way of life had prevailed once again. Thousands of shards in the archaeologist's depot. Are they evidence of another attack by the barbarians? Chief excavator Franz Humer says no. His mega-puzzle presents another picture. The fragments are from the colorful wall frieze from a wealthy merchant's villa. Its walls were made of shiny marble, just like the ones discovered in Pompeii. The merchants who had become rich allowed themselves almost any luxury. Their wife's jewelry was quite impressive. Many pieces were made of amber, which is no coincidence. At Carnuntum, the amber road coming from the Baltic Sea crossed the Danube. The large number of valuable finds is evidence of this commercial junction. And yet, archaeologists have only dug up 0.5% of the area. The number of finds is so high that the Austrian scientists have to apply the latest methods to process all the information. Within seconds, a mobile scanner generates a detailed image which can be accessed by scientists all over the world. While the border was overrun around 260 AD and the Romans retreated behind the Rhine and the Danube, Carnuntum first perished slowly in the 4th century. Other border cities fared better. Budapest, for example. Hungary's capital evolved from a Roman legionnaire camp as well, just like Petronell Carnuntum and Vienna. And like Vienna, it remained a rich, vibrant metropolis. Rome's empire in Europe extended all the way to the Black Sea. At Constanza, which was called Tomis in antiquity, the European part of the Limes ended. The statue of the Roman poet Ovid is a symbol of Roman civilization at its eastern limit. A victory monument for Emperor Trajan shows that the Romans enforced their rule by force of arms. His army numbered more than 100,000 men. Keeping the peace can be very expensive, then as now. In 1999, NATO tornadoes over Kosovo. A war over the country is raging. NATO tries to fight the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia's troops on the ground. Back then, thousands of reconnaissance photos of Kosovo were taken. International troops still control the area. Guns are prohibited at the Commission for Mines. This is where satellite photos and geological prospecting are analyzed. Natural resources are much needed foreign currency earners. Friedrich Lüth, director of the Roman Germanic Commission, and Christoph Schäfer visit the offices. They are hoping to find evidence of antique sources of raw material in the geologic maps. To be specific, they are looking for gold. Unfortunately, the people at the Commission for Mines could only offer hints. The archaeologists have to find the Romans' gold mines themselves. They drive on remote roads towards the Serbian border. It is not a particularly safe trip for Lüth and his team of Germans and Kosovans. Slag, a first trace. Ore was once smelted here, and until a few years ago, there was fierce fighting, as the bullet holes reveal. A farmer tells them about strange pits close to the graves from the Civil War. A search in the shadows of one of the cruelest wars in recent history. The scientists are met with a great deal of suspicion because they ask about these strange pits at a remote farmhouse.
Oh, we missed him.
Eventually, someone helps them, providing them with crucial information on a potential mine entrance in the mountains. Part of the Roman border troops' pay presumably came from here.
You can see the rib side over there. And over there, beneath the haystack.
In the distance, there are more holes. Could they be the filled-up entrances to ancient gold mines? Foundations lie at the foot of the mountains. Christoph Schäfer has stayed back in Ulpiana, a Roman town that was responsible for providing the soldiers at the Limes with supplies, among other things. In inscriptions, Schäfer is looking for evidence on whether the gold from the mountains was processed here. Supporting the army at the border cost a fortune. The water trick to distinguish weathered characters better. This inscripted stone has been used as a doorstep for centuries. Back in the mountains, the search for gold mines continues. After some persuasion, a local has been won over as a guide. A steep ascent leads to a first solid success, the entrance to a shaft.
10-20 Meter? Ja. Ja, das sind die Spuren des frühen Bergbaus hier in Kosovo.
The return trip to Ulpiana. The presence of the KFOR troops is obvious. They show how unstable Kosovo still is and how important normalization would be for this country. One way to achieve it would be by resuming science and research. The German archaeologists are breaking new ground in Kosovo, just like their French colleagues who are digging next door in Ulpiana. Archaeology as a bridge builder. Kosovans, French, and Germans are digging up their shared history. The relics from the time of the Roman Empire remind us that this era was shaped not only by wars, but rather largely by peace. Pax Romana, equal rights for all citizens of the multi-ethnic state of Rome. Archaeologists from the Roman Germanic Commission carrying out precision work. The pilot project is being protected by watchful eyes. The Kosovan colleagues have organized a whole crew of students who are helping out during their vacation. They wear yellow shirts and are digging up the roots of their past. All of them are full of hope for a peaceful future without K4 tanks and tornadoes.
We all know the recent history of Kosovo and of former Yugoslavia, so the importance of integration is obvious. Therefore, we welcome this initiative to bring young people from all over the Balkans together, a generation of students developing a common understanding for a common heritage will be the basis for a peaceful Europe.
The Romans were an occupying power. However, the Imperium Romanum was also a construct of different peoples that led the foundation for the civilization later called the Occident. An early Europe uniting peoples with one currency, one law, and one political system. An antique precursor to the European Union whose scope was marked by a clearly visible demarcation line. At least, that's today's scientific interpretation. The Limes was not a rigid bulwark, no iron curtain with a death strip. Instead, it was a customs and economic boundary with checkpoints to control the flow of people and goods. Indeed, that all does sound very modern. As one of the scientists said, the Limes was not built for times of war, but for times of peace.